The first time I realized my life was not going to be ordinary was the night I stood in front of my bedroom mirror with my mother's dress in my hands and felt my pulse racing, as though I was about to be caught doing something unforgivable. My name is Daniel. I'm 22 years old, and up until that moment I had always thought of myself as someone who could keep secrets neatly tucked away. But that dress, the way the fabric slid between my fingers, the way my chest tightened with both fear and longing, revealed something about me I had tried for years to bury. If you've ever had a secret that felt heavier than your entire world, you might understand why I kept my door locked that night and why I prayed that no one, especially not my girlfriend Emma, would walk in. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone trimmed their lawns on Sundays and waved politely to one another even if they barely remembered each other's names. My mom and I had always shared a bond, though not in the way most people would assume. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 5. I remember asking once why Dad never came back, and Mom had simply said, "Some people aren't brave enough to stay." That phrase stuck with me, maybe because I feared that one day she'd realize I wasn't brave enough, either not brave enough to tell her the truth about what I was hiding. By all appearances, I was a normal young man. I worked part-time at a small bookstore downtown, studied literature at college, and dated Emma, a bright and ambitious nursing student who believed I was destined to become a teacher or a writer. I smiled when she spoke about our future, but deep inside, I wondered if she would still love me if she knew the truth. Emma was kind, funny, and the kind of girl who liked to plan. She often talked about how she couldn't wait to graduate so she could finally feel stable, how she wanted to travel with me someday, maybe buy a house near the coast. But sometimes when she held my hand, I felt a strange kind of distance between us, as though she was holding onto an image of me that I wasn't sure I could live up to. That image was simple: Daniel, her boyfriend, her future husband, the man she could trust. And yet, standing alone in my room, holding my mother's dress, I couldn't help but wonder if the truth would destroy that version of me forever. The first time I put it on, I trembled so much I nearly tore the zipper. I wasn't supposed to be doing this, I had told myself that hundreds of times. But there was something about the way the fabric hugged my frame, the way I felt both vulnerable and strangely powerful, that made me want to see myself differently. I slid the dress over my shoulders, and when I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't just see Daniel. I saw a possibility, a shadow of someone I could be if I dared. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else, and yet beneath the terror was a flicker of something else: relief. That was the night I knew my secret wasn't just a passing curiosity. It was a part of me. My relationship with my mom was unusual in one important way. She was one of the rare people who believed in listening more than talking. She could read me better than anyone, sometimes too well, and I often wondered how much she suspected. She had never said anything, but there were moments like the time she folded laundry and paused just a second too long over a blouse that didn't belong to her that made me think she knew more than she let on. I wasn't ready to face that, though. So I laughed it off, pretended nothing was unusual, and carried the weight of my secret alone. Emma, of course, knew nothing. With her, I played the role of the dependable boyfriend, the man who remembered her favorite coffee order, who studied with her late into the night, who reassured her when exams made her anxious. But every time she leaned against me, every time she spoke about marriage or children, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. I wanted to be honest. I wanted to tell her that sometimes late at night I put on makeup and practiced walking in heels. But I was terrified that honesty would mean the end of us. My world was carefully balanced between two identities: the Daniel everyone saw and the Daniel I hid away. The introduction of my mom into this balance came unexpectedly. It was a Sunday afternoon, sunlight streaming through the curtains, when she knocked on my door without waiting for me to answer. I barely had time to shove the skirt I had been holding under my blanket. She stepped inside, carrying a basket of laundry, her expression casual, but her eyes sharp. "You've been awfully quiet today," she said, setting the basket on the chair. "Studying again?" I nodded quickly, too quickly, my pulse racing. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that told me she didn't believe me entirely, but she didn't press. Instead, She placed a folded sweater on my desk and said, "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The words lingered long after she left. Could I really tell her? Would she understand? Or would she look at me differently forever? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about her words, thinking about Emma, thinking about the person in the mirror who didn't quite match the person everyone expected me to be. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning I woke up groggy, my mind still caught between the world of dreams and the heavy thoughts that had haunted me through the night. The sunlight spilling into my room made everything feel exposed, and I couldn't shake the idea that maybe my mom had seen more than I realized yesterday. I moved slowly, mechanically, getting dressed for the day, but when I looked at myself in the mirror in my ordinary jeans and shirt, I felt a pang of disappointment. It was as though the person in the mirror wasn't me anymore, but only a mask I wore to keep the peace with everyone around me. I left the house quietly, making my way toward the bookstore where I worked. The little shop sat nestled between a bakery and a florist, its windows filled with paperbacks and old hardcovers, stacked like forgotten treasures. I loved the smell of the place's dusty pages, coffee drifting in from the cafe next door, the faint perfume of roses carried in on customers' coats. It was safe here, familiar, and yet even among the rows of novels and the calm of the register, my thoughts circled back to the hidden part of my life. Sometimes I would catch sight of a book cover, some story about transformation or identity, and I would wonder if the author had felt as torn as I did. At work, I was dependable Daniel. I stacked shelves, greeted regulars, and made polite conversation. But under that surface, my mind replayed the sound of my mother's voice telling me I could tell her anything, and I kept asking myself if she had meant it the way I wanted her to. When my shift ended, I found Emma waiting outside the store. She wore her nursing scrubs, her hair tied back neatly, and when she smiled at me, I felt both warmth and dread. She slipped her hand into mine, her grip firm, reassuring, and said, "You've been so distant lately. Is something wrong?" My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her everything right there on the sidewalk, to confess that I wasn't distant because of her, but because of me, because of this side of myself I was terrified to reveal. But instead I said, "Just tired. Long week." She studied me for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but she let it go, suggesting we grab coffee together before heading back to my place. Sitting across from her at the small cafe, I watched her talk about her classes, her exams, the patients she had shadowed that week. I nodded, smiled, and laughed at the right times, but inside I was somewhere else entirely. Every time her eyes lit up when she spoke about the future, I imagined what would happen if she found out about me. Would she still look at me the same way? Or would the light in her eyes fade into something else, confusion, maybe even disgust? When we got back home, my mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She greeted Emma warmly, and the two of them chatted easily, as they always did. Sometimes I wondered if Mom liked Emma more than she liked me, the way they laughed together, the way Emma always offered to help with cooking. I excused myself to my room, claiming I needed to change out of my work clothes. But as soon as I closed the door, I found myself staring at the dresser where I had hidden a few things: lipstick, a pair of tights, a blouse I had bought secondhand and smuggled into the house under a pile of textbooks. My hand hovered over the drawer, heart pounding, before I pulled it open just enough to glimpse the contents. The thrill and terror hit me all at once. Emma was in the other room. My mom was just down the hall. One wrong move, one accidental discovery, and everything could collapse. I closed the drawer quickly, forcing myself to breathe. Dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food, barely joined the conversation. Emma noticed, of course, and when she left later that evening, she kissed me gently and whispered, "Please don't shut me out, Daniel." Her words echoed long after she was gone. I sat in my room alone, staring again at the drawer, wondering if I was already shutting everyone out just by keeping the secret. That night, after the house went quiet, I couldn't resist. I pulled out the blouse, slipped it over my shoulders, and sat in front of the mirror. My hands trembled as I opened the lipstick and carefully applied it, my reflection slowly transforming into someone who felt both foreign and familiar. I whispered to myself, barely audible, Who are you really? The answer didn't come. But for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a world where maybe I didn't have to hide forever. I didn't hear the soft knock at my door until it was too late. My mom's voice came through the wood, gentle but firm. Daniel? Can I come in for a second? My heart stopped. The lipstick was still in my hand, the blouse obvious on my body. I scrambled to wipe my mouth with a tissue, to pull the blanket from the bed around my shoulders, but my movements were clumsy, panicked. The door opened before I could stop it. Mom stepped inside, her eyes landing on me instantly. For a split second, time froze. I expected shock, maybe anger, maybe disappointment. Instead, she looked at me quietly, her gaze steady but not unkind. She closed the door behind her without a word, walked over, and sat on the edge of my bed. My chest heaved as I tried to speak, to explain, to apologize. But she lifted her hand slightly, silencing me before I could begin. You don't have to be afraid of me, she said softly. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. Mom, she shook her head, her voice steady. Daniel, I've known for a long time. You think I don't notice things? I'm your mother. My throat tightened. Shame and relief battled inside me, a storm of emotions I couldn't name. You're not angry? I asked. She smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile. Why would I be angry? This is you. And I'd rather have the real you than a version of you who hides. For the first time in years, I let the tears fall. My mom pulled me into a hug, the kind that made the rest of the world feel far away. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just my mother. She was my ally. That night changed everything. After that night, I thought things would be easier, but instead it felt like my life had split into two even sharper halves. On one side was Emma, still in the dark, still holding on to the version of me she thought she knew. On the other side was my mom, who had seen me in a way no one else ever had, and whose quiet acceptance was both a comfort and a reminder of how much I was hiding from everyone else. I spent the following days watching her closely, looking for signs that something had changed between us, but she treated me exactly the same. She still asked if I wanted tea in the evenings, still teased me gently about my messy hair, still reminded me to lock the door when I left the house. And yet, beneath the ordinary gestures, there was a new weight to her gaze, a softness that made me wonder if she was silently telling me it was all right to breathe. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the living room, she said casually, You know, Daniel, when I was your age, I tried things too. Things people wouldn't have understood back then. I looked up from my book, my heart stuttering. Like what? She smiled faintly, her eyes distant. Fashion, hair, even the way I carried myself. People thought I was strange, but it was how I found out who I really was. You're allowed to figure yourself out too, you know. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, holding her words close like a fragile secret. They made me think of the nights I sat alone in front of the mirror, painting my lips carefully, trying on skirts that swished against my legs, feeling the strange, electric mix of fear and exhilaration. My mom's acceptance gave me courage, but it also made the risk of Emma finding out loom even larger in my mind. The contrast between the two women in my life was sharp. With my mom, I could almost breathe freely. With Emma, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. The fear of losing her was constant, and yet so was the guilt of lying by omission. One Saturday, Emma and I went to the park. We spread a blanket under the shade of a tree, and she leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. Do you ever feel like we're not as close as we used to be? She asked quietly. I swallowed hard. Why would you say that? She shrugged, her eyes fixed on the children playing nearby. You seem distracted all the time, like your mind is somewhere else. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her, but the words stuck like thorns in my throat. Instead, I kissed the top of her head and whispered, I'm sorry. I've just had a lot on my mind. She didn't push, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. That night, I replayed the moment over and over, imagining what it would be like to sit her down and explain everything. I pictured her face shifting from confusion to hurt, maybe even anger. The image was unbearable, and I convinced myself it was better to stay silent. But silence was its own kind of prison. My mom must have sensed the storm brewing inside me, because later that week she came into my room again, this time when I wasn't dressed up but sitting with my journal open, scribbling words I couldn't speak aloud. "You're hurting," she said softly. I looked up, startled. "I'm fine." She shook her head. "No, you're not. You're carrying too much alone." I hesitated before admitting, "I don't know how to tell her.
Emma.
I don't know what she'll do." Mom sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. "You can't control how she reacts. But you deserve to be seen, Daniel. All of you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love could survive honesty. But fear was stronger than hope, at least for now. To distract myself, I threw more energy into my private transformation. When Emma wasn't around and my mom was busy, I practiced with makeup tutorials I watched online in secret. I tried on different outfits I had carefully hidden, experimenting with colors and textures, learning how each small detail changed how I felt. There was a power in those moments, a quiet strength I didn't recognize in myself when I walked around as plain Daniel. But there was also vulnerability because every brushstroke of eyeliner, every painted nail, was another step deeper into a truth I might never be able to hide again. One evening, after Emma had called to say she was studying late at the library, I stood in front of the mirror in a long skirt and a soft blouse that belonged to my mom but which she had never asked me to return. The reflection staring back at me made my chest ache. For the first time, I whispered not just, "Who are you?" but, "Maybe this is me." The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. I didn't hear my mom's footsteps until she was at the doorway. My breath caught, but instead of surprise, she only leaned against the frame, her expression calm. "You look happy," she said simply. I blinked, startled. I don't know if that's what this is." She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "It is. Don't be afraid of it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "What if I lose Emma? What if I lose everything?" Mom sighed softly, brushing a strand of hair back from my forehead. "Then you'll still have yourself. And you'll still have me." Her words were both a balm and a warning. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that my world was shifting faster than I could stop it. The secret I had once thought I could keep forever was already slipping into the light, and soon, whether I liked it or not, I would have to face the consequences. I thought things were finally reaching some kind of balance, but life has a way of shifting the ground beneath your feet, right when you start to feel steady. My days had started to fall into a rhythm where I felt like I was discovering who I was without needing to constantly hide. School still had its challenges, whispers in the hallways and stares from people who weren't used to someone like me, but at home there was a steady foundation. Mom made sure of that. She encouraged me to experiment with clothes, to learn makeup properly, and to treat my reflection not as something to fear, but as something to explore. It almost felt like I was finally becoming myself, as though a fog was lifting. Yet every time the mirror smiled back at me, every time I saw the girl inside shining brighter, there was a shadow that lingered too. That shadow was the world outside, the one that didn't always forgive, didn't always understand, and sometimes didn't even want to try. The first cracks appeared during a weekend family gathering. Mom insisted that I could come as myself, but the idea terrified me. Relatives who hadn't seen me in months, cousins who only remembered the boy version of me, they'd all be there. Still, something inside urged me not to hide anymore. With Mom's help, I chose a soft floral dress, light makeup that wasn't too loud, and a pair of sandals that clicked lightly against the tiled floor as I walked into the living room. The moment the first cousin turned his head and blinked at me in disbelief, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my chest. Some smiled politely, others whispered, and a few just looked away as though they couldn't process what they were seeing. But what shocked me most was my aunt's expression. She stared at me like I had broken some unspoken rule of existence. By the end of the night, Mom's phone buzzed with messages from relatives telling her she was ruining me, that she was encouraging some phase that would bring shame. Mom showed me the texts, her hands trembling, but her eyes burning with fire. "They don't understand you," she said, her voice sharp. "But I do. And I won't let them take this away from you." Her words comforted me, but deep down I knew family pressure wasn't going to stop at just a few messages. At school, things became harder too. A picture of me from that family gathering somehow made its way onto a private group chat, and from there it spread like wildfire. Suddenly, people who had ignored me before began to snicker when I walked past. Lockers slammed a little harder when I opened mine. A boy I had known since childhood sneered and muttered a slur under his breath. Every day felt like walking into a storm with no umbrella, but when I came home, Mom tried to shield me with warmth and reassurance. Yet even she couldn't stop the world from seeping in. Then came the letter. At first, I thought it was just another bill or a piece of junk mail, but Mom's face went pale when she opened it. She handed it to me silently, and I read the words that seemed to blur together at first. It was from the school board. Someone had filed a formal complaint about me using the girls' restroom. They said it disturbed the comfort of other students. My stomach twisted, and I felt like the walls were closing in on me. Mom clenched her jaw and said she would fight it, that she wouldn't let them erase me like that. But the damage was already done. The school had made me into a spectacle, something to debate rather than someone to respect. The hearings began quietly, in a small office with a handful of administrators, but news like this never stays hidden. Soon, more students whispered about it, and even some teachers gave me pitying looks. I hated the pity more than the cruelty. It made me feel like I wasn't a person at all, just some kind of sad story being passed around. I wanted to disappear, but Mom wouldn't let me. She told me again and again that my existence wasn't up for debate, that my right to be myself was not something anyone could vote on. One night, after a particularly long day of whispers and stares, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection under the harsh, white light. I didn't look like the boy they wanted me to be anymore. But did I look enough like the girl I felt inside? The reflection seemed fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong word. I pressed my palms against the sink and whispered, "Who am I really?" That's when I heard Mom's voice through the door. She didn't knock, didn't demand that I come out. She just said, softly, "You're my child, and that's enough." Her words carried me through the next few weeks, but things escalated again when a reporter somehow caught wind of the hearings. Suddenly, I wasn't just a student in conflict with a school, I was a story. A headline. The camera crews showed up outside the building, trying to catch a glimpse of me walking in. They shouted questions I couldn't answer, words like controversy and backlash swirling around me like a storm I couldn't escape. Mom tried to shield me with her arm, but the flashing cameras made me feel naked, like every step I took was being dissected for public consumption. Friends I thought I could trust started pulling away, afraid of being associated with me. Online, the comments sections turned vicious. Some people defended me, but others said things so cruel that I couldn't repeat them out loud. Each night, I lay in bed wondering if I had the strength to keep walking into the world like this. Every time I faltered, Mom was there to remind me that I wasn't alone. But even her strength was being tested. I saw it in the way she rubbed her temples after long phone calls, in the way her smile sometimes trembled at the edges. The final straw came when I overheard two teachers in the hallway. They didn't know I was listening. One of them sighed and said, "This whole thing is tearing the school apart." Maybe it would be easier if... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Easier if I just gave up. Easier if I stopped being me. That night, I broke down in Mom's arms. What if they win? I asked, my voice cracking. What if the world is too big, too cruel, and I'm just not strong enough? She held me tighter than ever before, her tears mixing with mine. "Then we'll fight together," she whispered. "And if we fall together. But you'll not disappear. I won't let them erase you." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they lit a fire of dread in my chest. Because deep down, I knew this fight was far from over. And the more public it became, the more dangerous it would be not just for me, but for her too. The next morning, as I walked to school, the street felt eerily quiet. Too quiet. That's when I noticed the envelope tucked into the corner of my locker. My hands shook as I opened it, expecting another cruel note. But what I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a message. It was a threat. And that's where everything changed.